So Harish, first we wanted to know your point of view on why you think gathering, identifying a unique customer insight is so critical to business today, even perhaps more than it's ever been before, given the challenges.
That's Adrian, one of the questions which has been top of my mind, and reflecting on it, I think two or three reasons. One is that differentiating your brand is becoming increasingly challenging today. The marketplace is crowded with brands, all of whom are putting forward their offers to consumers. And if you need to differentiate yourself in the midst of that crowd, you need really sharp insights, which have not been gleaned by others so far. That's one reason that insight gathering, I think, is becoming terribly important, but also increasingly complex and challenging, because many brands are fighting for their share of the insights pie. The second reason, I think, is because consumers today are truly far more complex to understand than they were many years back. The influences on consumers today, the influence of a very materialist world, the influence of modern retail stores, the influence of digital shopping, the influence of increased affluence in our society, all this is leading to significant consumer paradoxes in society today. So for instance, consumers want to be connected all the time on their mobile phones and on the net. At the same time, consumers want the space of themselves, being by themselves and enjoying their own me time. In a similar way, consumers want to show off and make a point about their status and having arrived. At the same point, consumers also want to feel internally good about the brands that they are using. And I think there are many such paradoxes which play out in our own lives as consumers. So brands need to understand which side of the paradox they are going to sit on, or they need to understand whether they would offer a promise which would actually bring those paradoxes together in the consumer's mind. There again, I think gathering the right insight becomes very critically important. The third, Adrian, is what I was saying in my opening session at this event today. There is so much noise around you. The amount of noise has just multiplied manifold over the last decade. Therefore, gathering insight is challenging because you need to listen through the noise. And often marketers may fall prey to listening to the noise and assuming that they're listening to the sweet sounds of music. That's not right. And therefore, gathering insights is again very challenging. So it is to do with the noise, it is to do with the complex evolving consumer, and it is also to do with intense competition in the marketplace. For all these reasons, gathering insights is very challenging today, yet I think it is perhaps the most important underpinning which marketers have to focus on.
Thanks, Harish. Well, obviously it's very challenging, and through your experience as well as various brands that you've seen develop over time, what do you think are the best ways you've found, a few of the best ways, most effective ways to overcome these challenges?
First and foremost, Adrian, I always tell myself that consumer insight means keeping the consumer in sight. The consumer has to be in front of you all the time. I think as marketers, our ability to observe consumers with openness, with curiosity, always wanting to understand why the consumer is doing something or not doing something, I think is very important. Sometimes you do this directly, sometimes you do this through well-structured research techniques, sometimes you do this by observing society, by observing the community at large. All those influences have to help you to observe consumers in an insightful way. Marketers have to learn to ask themselves the right questions to which they then seek answers. So that's one method that I think marketers have to keep top of their minds. The second thing that marketers have to bear in their mind is that you have to discover spaces that competition has not necessarily discovered. And you have to go back and ask yourself time and again, any brand or any offering has to resolve a significant problem in the consumer's life. That problem gives rise to a need. And brands that address those problems and needs are the brands that win. So, cutting through the clutter, marketers still have to discover for themselves, here is a problem my consumer is facing. This problem is creating these needs in the consumer's life, and how can I, as a brand or an offering, fulfill those needs or address that problem that the consumer has. Too often, we see Me Too brands which are either not addressing a real need or addressing a need which has already been addressed. So I think discovering unmet needs is critical to building very successful brands for the future.
Thanks, Harish. As important as it is for businesses to gather consumer insight, and as challenging as it is, and perhaps there are methods to, as you pointed out, overcome those challenges. One of the bigger challenges, of course, institutionalizing the importance of consumer insight, the gathering as well as the conversion of it into an experience and the execution of it. What do you find are effective ways of institutionalizing this philosophy and ideology and putting it into practice?
I think first and foremost, Adrian, one good way of institutionalizing consumer insight is to have programs within our companies for our people in marketing, in sales, in manufacturing, across functions to meet consumers. We need to sensitize our people to consumer insight. And there is no better way of sensitizing our people to consumer insight than direct interface with the consumer. When the consumer speaks to you, he or she speaks to you in a very simple language. They describe their needs, they describe their satisfaction, they describe their areas of dissatisfaction. Listening to that and bringing that to the table, I think is very, very important. The second I would say is in all our office meetings, and I remember this, I remember Howard Schultz saying this in one of the interviews he had. This was our customer centricity dialogue of last year where he was speaking to Dr. Mukund Rajan. He says, at the table, whenever we have a meeting, I always leave a chair empty for the consumer. And I ask myself, the decision that we are taking today, is it based on some need that the consumer has? And how do I get the consumer's voice into the conference room? So I think we need many more stories about consumers, many more insights from consumers, many more consumer realities being discussed virtually at every meeting, in every conference room in our companies. We are very good at discussing business data, we are very good at discussing profit and loss accounts, gross margins that our brands make. How often do we discuss consumers? And we need to create spaces where we can have meaningful discussions about consumers in our offices and in our conference rooms every single day. The third, when we launch a product or service, I think it's important for us to ask ourselves always, what is the need or insight that this is based on? Has it been tested well enough? And only then take the step of moving towards the marketplace. I think that has to be an integral step. I know many of our companies do that, but I would say that has to be implemented with rigor at every single point in time. And fourth, Adrian, I think we should be very open to hearing. We should have systems and mechanisms in place of hearing consumer voices which are not necessarily in synchrony with what we feel or think. Because I think getting diverse consumer voices also helps you identify whether you need to tweak your insight or move in a slightly different direction. I would say a company has to identify all its customer listening posts, and each company would have hundreds of customer listening posts. The stores at which you sell, your salesmen who go out into the marketplace, it could be your research techniques, it could be people calling up your toll-free number and saying what they need about the product. It could be observations of consumers, meetings with consumers, focus groups, quantitative in-depth research. How does a company get all that together, all that data together in a single warehouse from where the data can be examined and powerfully analyzed? My sense is that a lot of our companies have a lot of consumer data, but that data is lying in silos. True insight emerges when you're able to integrate the data and look at it holistically, for which I think the entire profession of consumer insights needs to shake hands with the profession of consumer analytics. And when those two come together, I'm sure magical insights will emerge, which our companies will find very powerful for the future.
Very good. Thank you, Harish.
Thank you.